Part 1. Paris breathes slowly. Paris, the 15th of April 2019. Late afternoon slid over the city like a golden veil, the sunlight settling on the Seine in trembling silver bands, as if the water were trying to remember the seconds before nightfall. Doves perched on the railing of the Pont Saint-Louis, motionless as musical pauses. The air smelled of warm stone, river water, and a nostalgic spring, a smell only Paris can have. In the middle of the Ile de la Cité, Notre Dame stood like a breathing body. Each stone had accumulated 8,500 years of footsteps. The oak roof was black, as old bones hiding the groans of shrinking winters. The lead roof shook slightly when the wind blew, emitting a faint sound like an old person turning over. Inside, light streamed through the stained glass windows into a floating golden dust. Cold blue, deep purple, holy gold blended and dissolved in the air. The footsteps of tourists echo hollowly, as if they were walking in the bowels of a stone boat drifting slowly on the river of time. People lower their voices not by rule but by instinct. This place seems to hear thoughts. Higher up, where no tourists go, La Forêt, the ancient oak forest, lies like the spine of an ancient creature. Steel scaffolding hugs the tower like an exoskeleton. Workers hook up straps, pull drills, thread cables dwarfs before the scale of the past, unaware that they are placing their hands on the muscles of history. Antoine, 27, an electrical technician, stands at the edge of the scaffolding. The wind from the heights carries the smell of river water and wood dust into his lungs. He tightens screws, tightens knots, and looks down on Paris. Roofs, chimneys, terraces stacked like rippled plains. Working here is like touching the back of a mythical beast, he thinks, smiling when his choirmates whisper, "Are you okay?" "Okay, it's just, I'm standing on 800 years of age." 1810 on the ground floor, Laurent on security duty. The rows of monitors cast a green shadow on his cheekbones. His job was to watch, record, repeat. A 3-minute sweep. Main door, sanctuary, corridor, bell vault, roof. Camera, 14 attic area lightly grainy. A small light flickered and then went out. A reflection from a lead plate. He wrote down, Hashana 4 weak signal. Sipped his cold coffee, his eyes darting around again. 1818, the fire alarm cut through the air like a dry knife. Alarm incendie zone adequate. Laurent jumped up, called the walkie-talkie. Etienne rushed up the spiral stone staircase, switched on the flashlight to cut through the dust. The wooden door opened. Shadows and dust. No fire. No smoke. Black scaffolding, wooden beams running into the night. False alarm, he said, still breathing heavily. Laurent let go of the button. The red light turned green. He pressed reset. A simple operation like deleting a message. If only the camera were clearer. If the guard had stood any longer. If anyone had smelled the hot wood in those 5 seconds. But tragedy does not happen with the word if. 1822 on the roof. The end of a piece of wire just pulled from the drill is still warm. A small spot of heat, the size of half a toothpick, touches the dry wood powder stuck to the edge of the oak beam. No one sees. No one hears. The fire does not flare up. It sleeps, like a predator cowering in its den. 1830 Laurent changes shifts. Julien sits down, opens a soda, leans back and looks at the screen indifferently. Camera 14 flashes again. The streak of light lengthens, no longer like a reflection. Just a second to look closely. But he does not look. 19, the fire clings to the wood, crawling along the grain as if with a memory, searching for oxygen through the gaps in the scaffolding. 800-year-old oak which has stood strong through war, revolution, winter turns into perfect tinder when exposed to heat. The crackling is as light as tearing a page. Below, the organ plays a few notes, the sound swirling up the stone arch, drowning out the crack in the roof. On the bridge, someone takes a photo of a strange bright spot in the corner of the frame. Probably a reflection. He laughs, posting it on Instagram. No one notices the bright spot in the right corner. 1930. The fire rises like a clenched fist, finds air, oxygen rushes in. A crack the bones of the wooden roof. The cathedral, an 800-year-old creature, opens its eyes not to see, but to hurt. Part 2, First Alert. In the monitoring room, Laurent sets down his glass, fingers scrolling through the end-of-day checklist. A day in an 8.5-century-old structure is rarely dramatic. Wait and repeat. Screen Haitian 4 shakes slightly, static common when metal scaffolding blocks waves. A bright spot flashes and then goes out. He still writes Haitian 4 weak signal. At that moment, a few mist-like smoke particles slip through the gaps in the wood, running into the sensor. The new system scans. Beep, beep, beep. The red text flashes. Laurent calls Etienne, and Etienne runs, opens the door, sees darkness, dust, and wood. Nothing, he says. False alarm, 4 dangerous words in any disaster. No one realizes the system is in the wrong place. It should be Charpente forest of beams where the fire just touches the wood. When Etienne closes the door, a small flame the size of 2 fingers smolders above his head, 3 meters from the wood and 3 minutes of time. Laurent writes, 1821 false alarm, checked, presses reset. The city continues to breathe slowly. 1843, the fire is as high as a hand, pressed against the oak beams from the time of Louis IX. The wood is dry as ash, and a thin layer of construction dust sticks the perfect kindling. The fire does not flare. It creeps, slow, precise, patient. 1851 down in the main nave, a volunteer clearing chairs, suddenly stopped by a strange sound like an animal gnawing on bones above. She listened. Silence. A minute later, the organ played another note, the echo of the stone vault filling every strange crevice. 19-camera Hachon 4 was blinded by fire. No one was looking. Julien leaned over to the soccer game on his phone. Down by the Pont au Double Bridge, a pair of Japanese tourists watched the thin smoke trail, smiled, maybe someone's grilling, and took a selfie. The right corner of the photo showed a pale orange patch. 1914, the flames caught the main air duct, standing upright like a knife. 1918, the second siren, more intense, more sudden. Julien knocked over a can of water, looked up. Hachanafor was red. "What the hell is this?" he called. Etienne was at the other end of the church, down 2 stairs, a corridor. When the skylight opened, the heat hit like a furnace. The fire had eaten through the large beams, and tiny burning wood dust was flying. "Fire on the roof! Real fire!" Etienne shouted. "Call the fire department! Evacuate now!" The door slammed shut as a piece of wood fell in front of us, 14 minutes after the first alarm. And exactly 5 fateful minutes before the fire reached the top of the tower, the alarm rang throughout the cathedral. Visitors were confused. Some thought it was a drill, some were live streaming. A child asked, "Did someone turn on the red light up there?" A second later, a red light fell from the skylight. From that moment on, the place entered its most intense hour since the revolution. Part 3. Fire on the Roof. The fire on the roof did not explode. It spread like a thinking creature. Beneath the lead, the oak forest lay still like a sleeping living spine. 800 years dry, hardened against storms but easily ignited by a single dust cloud. Etienne backed away from the heat. The fire had clung to the highest point of the beam, rolling up, crushing the wood to charcoal, making a cracking sound like breaking bones. Each crackle, not just the burning material, but an old groan coming from the throat of the stone. The white smoke was clear at first, then opaque. A streak of wind pierced the very gap in the scaffolding, turning the roof into a furnace. Etienne backed up the ladder, shouting, "All over the roof!" The radio answered, "Fire department is coming." He crossed the corridor. When he looked up, in the middle of the vast black dome, an orange halo shone down. Down in the main hall, the group of Spanish tourists were the first to see. "Mira, mama, hey fuego," the girl said as a drop of fire fell, dissolving like a not pretty firework, just cold and evil. The bell rang. The staff chased the guests away in 2 languages. The line of people retreated, some still looking up at their cameras. Above, the fire was half the size of a car. 1929. The spire, a wooden spike covered in lead standing just above the roof's ribs, began to redden. The wind from the river blew oxygen like a fan. The flames clung to the spire. The church looked like a beast with its heart hollowed out from within. Outside in the square, the crowd looked up. A curtain of smoke rose from between the two bell towers. "This can't be real," an American muttered. Etienne stood as if buried before the golden Madonna, glowing with fire. He heard the flames racing across the roof like waves, sometimes screaming. "My shift must save the church," he told himself. But the church was too big. The fire was too fast. He had only 2 hands. Part 4. Battle on the Roof. 1936, the ladder truck slid in. The firefighters jumped down as if running into a battlefield. Commander Leonard held out his binoculars, the worst position above the roof beams, just below the spire. If the spire collapsed, it could pierce the nave. A helicopter dumps water? No, it will collapse the whole thing. 26,000 tons of rock couldn't withstand a direct hit from above. The force was like a truck falling. "Get in. Cut the fire off the tower." Soldiers in heavy uniforms, headlamps shaking, walked down the narrow spiral stone staircase, barely wide enough for one person. The technical corridor under the roof opened up to hell. A storm of living fire pounded them like a punch. "The whole forest is on fire," one blurted. 1,300 ancient oak trees, each of which had once been a tree trunk, whistled, cracked, and fell like a real forest collapse. A beam fell in front of them, exploding into a shower of small flames. The captain pulled back, giving the command, "Don't save the roof, save the bell tower." If the ton of bells fell, the 2 towers would shake, and they might collapse. The only option was to build a wall of water to stop the fire in front of the wooden bell ropes. The pressure hoses were fully opened. The water shot like silver tongues but evaporated midway. They had to get close enough to hear the cathedral's bones crackle. "Oh my God, we're in the belly of the monster," someone breathed. Multiple holes in the roof opened up to a black, yellowed sky. The wind was directionless, each gust a knife. Etienne on the floor saw the fire break through the roof like a crater, ash falling like stars, statues and altars stained red. Outside, the crowd was silent. No one sang, no one shouted, no one could live stream anymore. Everyone just stood, as if time had run out. On the North Tower, another team had a deadly mission: to stop the fire before the wooden bell rope. "Build a water barrier! Turn the valve to full! Keep the pressure!" 2 crisscrossing nozzles built a shimmering wall. Drops of water broke on the stone like flying glass. A man with a burned hand did not pull away, shouting, "More water!" "They are fighting real fire," a woman said with a trembling hand. "No, with time," the man replied. Etienne looked up, the red light of the roof pressing down like a negative pressure. "Keep it," he whispered. But the roof did not listen. Part 5, 1959. Tower falls. 1959, the tower is engulfed in flames. "Get all teams out of the spire! Get out now!" Leonard hissed over the radio. On the roof, fire seized the structure's throat. A long, crackling sound ran through the body of the cathedral. The tower leaned, slowly, like a ritual. The flames flared up like fireworks, cutting a line across the Paris sky. Etienne stood directly below, his 800-year-old premonition shifting above his head. "Don't fall." The wind whipped the flames like a final slap. Then the tower broke. First there was a roar, then the sound of wood cracking, then only light. The tower broke through the roof like a spear ripping through armor. 3 seconds later, the 800-year-old collapsed. People on the bridge covered their mouths. Some knelt. A monk put his hand to his heart, only enough time to say, "Mon Dieu." The firefighters, though able to get out, stood frozen not in fear, but in pain. Etienne was knocked down by the shockwave. Dust and glass fell like black snow. Through the ash, he saw something strange. Where the tower had crashed, the golden altar still stood, not that the fire had won, but only that the roof had. We haven't lost everything, he muttered, then pulled himself up. There's still the heart. Part Vi, continuous version. The firewater rose over the stone floor like a black tide, heavy with the smell of ash and hot metal. Etienne stood in the opaque steam, his lungs so full of smoke that every breath felt like swallowing fire. Overhead, drops of molten lead fell from the roof, crackling like metallic hail. Benoit's voice, hoarse and urgent, came from the radio on his shoulder. Can't save the roof. Turn to protect the core. Core, meaning the reliquary. Not the stone, not the structure, but the crown of thorns, the thing that people believed for hundreds of years had been placed on the head of Christ. Etienne could hear his heart pounding in his wet shirt. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He ran. The corridor leading to the reliquary was dark and narrow, the sound of running water rushing with his steps like a stream in a cave. The stone vaults creaked with the heat from the burning roof, as if the church were groaning. At the end of the corridor, in the flickering light of flashlights, stood Chaplain Jean-Marc Fournier. His black robes were covered in white ash. No one asked why the other man was there. They all knew. When Etienne said, "We must take the crown," he just nodded calmly, like someone who knew the answer before the question. The electronic lock on the reliquary flashed red. The system locked itself when the heat reached an alarming level. Etienne pounded on the control panel, but the door didn't budge. "Give me the axe," he said, his voice small but clear over the roar of the fire. Etienne gave the axe. One blow, two blows, three blows. Blue sparks flew, the acrid smell of burning plastic. The lock beeped, rejected, and then stopped. Etienne tried connecting the bare wires. A spark flew. The lock released. The door opened slightly into the cold darkness. In the center of the room was a glass tube. Inside was the crown of thorns. No glittering gold, no halo. Just a thin, surprisingly simple ring of old metal. But Etienne didn't see the metal. He saw the memory of Paris. They lifted the crown, placed it in a heat-resistant shipping box. Etienne locked the box, wearing it against his chest like the heart of the city. At that moment, there was a crash. The ceiling behind them collapsed, blocking the passage they had just passed. They didn't look back. They ran through the smoke. When Etienne and Father Fournier emerged from the north side door, the firelight reflected off the glass case before he could hear it. The crowd in the square saw them before they heard the sound. A woman shouted, her voice cracking, "They saved the crown!" The cry lit a fire in the hearts of thousands. Applause erupted. Weeping followed. No one applauded for the architecture. They applauded for the memory that was still alive. Etienne collapsed in exhaustion. Father Fournier placed his hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You have saved the soul of Paris." But the battle was not over. 10 p.m. The firemen's water wall still held the bell tower steady. Etienne looked up at the two bell towers, as if he were looking at a loved one on a ventilator. He turned back to the church. Benoit held his hand out to stop him. "You are not a fireman." Etienne looked into the darkness where the roof had collapsed, his voice as quiet as stone. "Tonight, I am the keeper of memory." Then he disappeared into the darkness of the church again. This time, not because of duty, but because of his oath. Part 7:03 a.m. The night dragged on as if it would never end. At 3 a.m., Paris still did not sleep. The streets around the Ile de la Cité were covered in a white mist mixed with ash, and smelled of river water and burnt wood. The fountains still sounded. Swish, 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 the mechanical heartbeat of a body that was dying but not dead. Etienne stood in the nave, between the stone columns that still radiated heat. The water rose to his ankles, reflecting the red glow of the last fire. The ceiling was gone, only the dark gray sky where the roof of the cathedral had been. He walked slowly, each step submerged in the water, feeling like he was walking in a ruined dream. Each step made a rustling sound like a human groan. Outside, the crowd was still there, standing by the Pont Saint-Michel, the dim light of cell phones illuminating tear-stained faces. No one spoke. There was only the sound of breathing, the sound of the river, the sound of the thin column of smoke slowly dissipating. Paris was silent, as if the whole city were bowing its head. Etienne looked up, and he saw it. In the center of the altar, the golden cross still stood, not tilted, not fallen, not smoky. The light from the dying flames reflected off the metal, creating a soft glow like someone breathing. Not the light of a lamp, not the light of a fire, but the light of something that survived destruction. Etienne stopped. He held his breath. It felt like any sound could cause the whole scene to vanish. A drop of water fell from the collapsed roof, a small crackle, like a bell signaling the return of life. In the corner of the church, a young fireman fell to his knees, took off his helmet, his hands shaking. He looked at the cross, his mouth moving. "We keep the heart." Benoit stepped forward, his eyes red, his shirt soaked, looked around at the ashes, and spoke slowly, his voice so low that Etienne didn't know who he was talking to, the fire department or the cathedral itself. "She lives." No one corrected him. No one said it. No one said the building. Everyone knew Notre Dame was not a thing. It was a person. And tonight, that person had been pulled from the dead. Etienne sat down on the floor, his back against the stone column, his breath mixing with the rising steam. He took off his gloves, put his bare hands on the cold ground. It felt damp, rough, cracked but whole. He couldn't cry anymore. His chest felt lighter, hollower, as if he had been saved along with the cathedral. Benoit's voice came through the radio. "The fire is contained." No one said extinguished. The word was too final, too absolute. No one wanted to talk about death. Control, that is, to hold back, to prevent further loss. Etienne stood up and walked along the central path of the nave. The sound of water splashed with each step, and heat still radiated from the walls. Above, the void where the roof was swallowed by darkness, but below, the statues and stone columns still stood, silent, like witnesses who had just survived an 8-hour battle. As Etienne passed, a young soldier whispered, "We have just fought 8 centuries." Etienne smiled but did not reply. Outside, the bells of a nearby church, not Notre Dame's, but St. Severin's tolled briefly, like a requiem for the fire. The whole city looked up. An old man, in a thick coat and woolen cap, spoke without looking at anyone. "She has endured war, revolution, storm, and now fire, but she still stands." The young man beside him nodded. "Because Paris is not built only of stone." Etienne turned to look one last time. The cross was still shining. The golden light bounced off the water, reflected off the wall, touched the cracks, the still warm stones, making them glow like veins carrying life. He bowed his head, did not pray, did not say a word, only thought, "We have kept the memory of Paris." Outside, the wind blew gently from the river. Paris exhaled, a long, deep breath, tired but alive. The night gradually faded. Part 8, Heritage. Dawn rose over Paris without anyone hearing it. The pale gray sky covered the city with a thin mist like a mourning scarf. The water of the Seine reflected the cold silver of morning after a long night. Ashes from the oak roof drifted in tiny black dots on the water, like letters from a page of memory just burned. Parisians stood on the bridges connecting the two sides of the Ile de la Cité, speechless, staring at the gap where the spire had once pierced the air like a spear. They stood like that not to witness the loss, but to guard their memories. The roof is gone, the tower has fallen, but the main structure stands. The city's announcements sounded dry on radio and television, but they failed to convey the fact that all of Paris felt as if a part of its body had been gouged out. TV cameras panned over the ashes, over the smoldering wood, over the huge hole in the roof, but they could not capture the emptiness that sucked in everyone's chest. On the Pont Saint-Louis, an old man in a woolen cap stood still for a long time, then said to the stranger standing next to him, "She survived war, she survived storms, and she survived fire." The young man replied, not taking his eyes off the cathedral, "Paris is not made of stone. Paris is made of memory." News of the fire spread around the world as quickly as the fire on the roof, but this time It brought with it different numbers: 50 million euros, 100 million, 200 million. Corporations, governments, financiers, ordinary people, they poured in money like a flood. But Etienne stood in the churchyard, watching the crowds taking pictures of the ashes, thinking, money can buy new wood, new stone, a new roof, but it can't buy back the lost feeling of 2019. In the conference rooms of in the Heritage Conservation Office, the debate broke out. Rebuild exactly or create a new icon? Use the old oak or the steel and titanium of today? An architect stood in front of a laser-scanned 3D model of the cathedral and said softly, "We are not rebuilding stone. We are rebuilding the feeling of people standing in front of it." Downstairs, archaeologists knelt on the ground still damp with firewater, using small brushes to pick up bits of ash and lead, and put them in glass tubes sealed like Roman archaeological samples. Not for study, but to preserve the last body of the cathedral after the night of fire. A little girl holding her mother's hand on the bridge looked into the black void in the roof and asked, "Does Notre Dame hurt?" The mother bent down and answered in a voice she herself did not believe she could keep calm. "Yes, but they are healing her." No one called the cathedral it. Everyone called it her. Time began its work. Engineers erected scaffolding. The architects built models. The firemen returned to check the structural safety. The entire city becomes temporary builders, each in his own way, with prayers, with songs, with standing still on the bridge as a ritual. Someday in the future, the cathedral doors will reopen. Who will be the first to enter the new nave? Maybe a child holding his mother's hand, like the little girl that day. Or Etienne, who ran through the burning corridors to save Paris's memory. He will stand before the golden cross that survived the ashes. He will look up at the new roof. He will hear his footsteps echo in the nave and know that he saw the cathedral die the night it died and rise again in the morning. Paris will breathe again. Because stone can burn, wood can collapse, towers can break, but memories cannot.